I've often encountered the notion that God was an idea invented long ago to explain things that we did not understand. But as science has closed the gaps in our knowledge, the need for God has become less and less. With this in mind, some say that any argument for God that involves the creation of the universe is nothing more than a God of the gaps argument that will disappear as science advances. So, how do we distinguish between dodgy God of the gaps arguments and legit arguments? Hi, I'm Kirk, and I'm a scientist and a philosopher and a person who spends a lot of time thinking about the why questions in life. So if you're interested in discussions pertaining to God, science, and life, then please subscribe to my channel here, where I'll be posting on a regular basis. You can also subscribe to my social media accounts, and the links are below. All God of the gaps arguments have a common premise, either stated or unstated, that goes like this. If we do not know what caused something, then God did it. For example, I had a pair of Gore-Tex bib snow pants that I really liked, but about 3 years ago, they went missing. I have searched my house from top to bottom and have no explanation for why they are missing. With this in mind, a God of the gaps argument would go something like this. The first premise, I have no explanation why my snow pants have vanished. Second premise, if we have no explanation for something, then God did it. Logical conclusion, therefore, God made my snow pants disappear. So let's think about this. Can you think of any reason why this might be a dodgy argument? Well, the first problem with a God of the gaps argument is that the main premise seems a little sketchy. To clarify, why should we always think that because we cannot explain something, therefore God did it? The second problem is that there are other possible explanations, and perhaps we may discover the real one someday. For example, maybe I left them somewhere when I was traveling and totally forgot that I had done that. Personally, that seems like a much safer conclusion. So we can come up with a general response to the God of the gaps argument as follows. It does not logically follow that because we cannot explain something, that therefore God did it. There might be another explanation. Here's another question for you. Are all God of the gaps arguments false? If we think about this for a minute, it should become evident that it does not logically follow that if we cannot explain something, then God did not do it. So we're left with a rather unhelpful situation when we observe something we cannot explain. Maybe God did it, maybe he didn't. Remember the basic premise of a God of the gaps argument? It went like this. If we cannot explain something, then God did it. But we know of plenty of things that the ancient Greeks could not explain and attributed to their gods, but science has now explained in a way that we can test it out for ourselves. The bottom line is that the basic premise of the God of the gaps argument is false. This raises another question. How could we legitimately infer that God did something that we cannot explain? In thinking about this, it seems that we need another premise. We need to draw conclusions on the basis of knowledge rather than ignorance. In other words, it seems that we need some positive evidence rather than the absence of evidence. So if an argument builds on known positive evidence, it is not a God of the gaps argument, which is based on ignorance. When it comes to comparing Greek mythology with Judeo-Christianity, there is a very large difference when it comes to science. The book of Job in the Bible is thought by many scholars to be the oldest book in the Bible, written around the time of Abraham, almost 4,000 years ago, long before any writings we have from ancient Greece. Yet in that book, it explicitly refers to laws of nature that God has created, which govern the world. It states, "Do you know the ordinances of the heavens, or fix their rule over the earth?" From the earliest book in the Bible, there was always the belief that God had established laws of nature. Thus, even if they couldn't explain how storms or earthquakes worked, the assumption was that it was the laws of nature that determined these things. A miracle was something that overruled the laws of nature. For example, when Christ took 2 fish and 5 small loaves of bread, fed 5,000 people, and had 12 baskets of leftovers, The people knew that this was something that the laws of nature cannot do. When Christ calmed the storm with a simple word, they marveled, saying, "What kind of man is this, that even the winds and sea obey him?" Implicit in their exclamation was that a storm was a large natural event, but here was someone who has power over the laws of nature and natural events. In these cases, the God of the gaps premise, "we don't know what did this, therefore God did it," is replaced with the premise, "on the basis of our knowledge of nature, we have testable evidence from science that the laws of nature cannot do this. Therefore, something higher than nature is doing it." And in the case of Jesus, the cause was visible and perceptible. Jesus did it. That would be a fair inference based on a sufficient knowledge of science such that we know that the laws of nature are being overruled. But this raises another question that might go like this. Isn't a miracle a violation of the laws of nature? The laws of nature produce repeatable effects that we can observe. In fact, the laws of nature are what makes science possible. So isn't it better to put our confidence in the laws of nature? Well, we can say two things about this. First, these laws of nature are what makes it possible for us to identify a miracle. We observe something that we know on the basis of experimentation that the laws of nature cannot produce. But can the laws of nature be overruled? It might be helpful to think of the laws of nature as a computer operating system within which you intervene anytime you wish. For example, I have written various programs running in a different language that work within the larger operating system of my computer. In other words, the operating system was designed such that the programmer could intervene and even interact with the program from the outside. So if the laws of nature are the operating system of the world designed by God, then it should not be surprising if the ultimate programmer can intervene and interact within the natural operating system. Sometimes this will produce effects that our knowledge of science tells us are contradictions to what the laws of nature would have done, like feeding 5,000 people with only 2 fish and 5 loaves and having much more left over than when you started with, for example. So perhaps we could sum this discussion up as follows. A God of the gaps argument is based on ignorance or the absence of knowledge. A legit argument for a miracle is based on testable, repeatable knowledge of what the laws of science can and cannot do and when it's being overruled. I want to leave you with a fascinating question that I will look at in my next video. Does science have its own God of the gaps? Well, I hope you enjoyed the video or at least found it thought-provoking. And if you did, please share it, or you can leave a comment in the section below. And also, don't forget to hit the like button.